State and urban land program some years ago, and went on to other things that you'll see today. He is Senior Vice President of Equity Residential, which is, he'll tell you much more about this, but I think by many measures the largest holder of apartments that we know of, and certainly the largest public holder. And their numbers are mind-boggling. Our benefactor, just by comparison, our benefactor and sponsor of our master's program, Nathan Collier, his company owns something north of 10,000 units, and he's the largest, I think, private student apartment holder in the nation. He has something like a tenth of what Equity Residential holds. So this is a big property holder. Equity Residential is in 16 states and Washington, D.C., and Barry manages their apartment acquisitions and development related activity, their dispositions, renovations, and capital improvements for something like 34,000 units in the southeastern United States. So he's someone bringing a tremendous amount of engagement in the industry and experience with it. He also works closely with the development people, as we learned from visiting with him. He has 25 years of experience in the industry, 10 of them at least with Equity Residential, and he's directly involved with, has been directly involved with billions of dollars of transactions in his experience. And as some of you know already, he's a delightful guy to chat with. And so Barry, we're delighted to have you here.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Well, I will, let me tell you a little bit about myself, because I'm a graduate of UF from 1982, and there wasn't a master's program, there wasn't any real estate program at the time, but I got a degree in business. I think my major was called real estate and urban analysis at the time, but it was, I mean, I think it's the closest thing to what some schools may have as an undergraduate real estate program, and it was very good. I mean, my UF experience was very good. The people I met at UF, I still know today. I mean, it's kind of a, you know, I have people to call on who for the last almost 30 years I've been, you know, friends with and colleagues with in the industry around the state and in other states. People move around. But I think your time here now is something that, for the rest of your career is very good. The relationships that you've made in this part of UF, you'll always have, and it's really helpful. You know, you'll see as you go forward and other people get jobs and do things, what the kind of connections you'll have. And that's something that is unique about being at a school like this. And if you stay in Florida, you know, that is a unique experience, which you'll have to kind of have it to know what I'm talking about. But my career, it's funny, because I finished school in 1982. I think interest rates were, you know, 18% or something, 20%, you know, to buy a house. Today they're 4 or 5. And the economy sucked. It was a horrible time. There were no jobs, and I didn't know what I was going to do when I finished school. And along came the Florida Department of Transportation. They came to UF and FSU and needed a bunch of kids to do things for these new highways. Interstate 595 in Fort Lauderdale was being built, was going to be built. And they needed people to appraise the real estate, to buy the real estate, to actually go out and negotiate with homeowners, landowners. And so from someone finishing school, not knowing what he was going to do, in about a minute, I had this amazing job with the state. I can't say it was like a high-paying job, but I was what they called a right-of-way specialist, and they sent me to school. My first 6 weeks were going to school to learn how to do things for the state. They taught us how to read surveys, how to read road construction maps. They taught us how to negotiate with people, how to read contracts, how to read leases, what do things mean. And so that too was really helpful, because aside from going to school and learning about contracts or learning about leases, when you really have to do it, it's an entirely different thing. You actually don't know anything when you really have to go do it the first time. So this little extra training that we had was quite helpful. I mean, just even learning how to read a survey was, incredibly important and very helpful. And I have to say that job was one of the best times I've had in my career, because for a few years there was this group of 20-something-year-olds, a bunch of us, who went into this state bureaucracy where nothing moved very quickly ever. And we were like running all over the place. We bought this 595 project, which built this highway from the Port Everglades in Fort Lauderdale to the western boundary of developable Broward County, was at the time the largest interstate highway project ever. It was like over $1 billion, which at that time was a ton of money. And the reason it was so expensive is it went through an urban area. Most of the interstate highway system went through rural areas when it was built. So we ended up, in my first job, I went out and not only did I appraise properties, I bought them. I mean, I went out and met with owners and bought hotels, manufacturing facilities, trailer parks, movie theaters, all kinds of things. And I learned all about every piece of real estate imaginable. Because we would buy someone's property but give them an easement through here, we'd keep part of it, or, there was just every piece of real estate that you could possibly run into, permanent easements, temporary easements, just all kinds, eminent domain, that whole process I was part of, and it just was really fascinating. The reason I'm mentioning all that right now, because that was my first job, it doesn't sound like, maybe it does sound like an exciting job, but at the time, it was kind of a dud job. Oh, you're going to go work for the state? That sounds really interesting, especially after you thought you're going to get some great job, making a ton of money somewhere. But the reason I'm mentioning it is it was a great job. I learned a lot, and the things I learned I've used for the rest of my life. And I would say to everyone in this room, start anywhere when you're looking to get your career going. Just get started is the main thing. It doesn't matter what it is, just get started somewhere, because where you'll go from there, once you're in, and one thing leads to another, and your careers will move right along. So that's my little tidbit of advice about getting started in this business in a tough economy. My other jobs were, I've only had a few. I worked for a bank. We made loans. I worked for a savings and loan, and it was based in California, but we were commercial lending on the East Coast. So we made a lot of apartment loans, and that's how I got into the apartment business, learning all about apartments. And then I worked for a pension fund advisor. Again, primarily, I managed every property type, but we focused on apartments. And now, for the last 15 years, I've been at Equity Residential, which, as Dr. Archer said, is the largest public owner of multifamily in the U.S. And when I started in this business, apartments were not an institutional asset class. Nobody wanted them. They weren't, life companies didn't own them. People didn't think of apartments the same way they thought of hotels or retail or industrial. Today, apartments, if you look at the title of my presentation today, it says ahead of the pack and staying there. Today, apartments are the #1 asset class in institutional real estate, ahead of hotels, office, retail, et cetera. And that is because of the demographics that drive it. And so let me just go through a few of these things. Population growth. The U.S. has about 300 million people and adds, well, you can see from the slide, we will grow by 33% in the next 20 years. That's 94 million people over a 30-year period. So we're growing at 3 million people a year. So one of the questions is, if you're growing at 3 million people a year, you don't need job growth to fill up housing. You need to house 3 million people a year. So one of the questions in our business lately has been, how are you filling up apartments? Because the reason apartments are so well thought of today is because they're so well occupied and they're generating so much money. But how are they doing that when the job picture stinks? The reality is households are what drive apartment occupancy, household growth. Job growth helps, but just adding households is what's filled up our buildings in a time when jobs went the other direction. So what this slide is saying is we need 60 million new housing units over a 30-year period. That's a lot of housing. A lot of people in this room are echo boomers. Does anyone know what that means? If your parents are a baby boomer, then you are an echo boomer, children of the baby boomers. The baby boomers were a very large, I think the largest demographic, post-World War II demographic in this country. The echo boomers are even bigger. That demographic has 78 million people basically in what we call prime renter age. Well, if you look at the slide, by 2015, there'll be 67 million people aged 20 to 34 in their prime renter years in this country. That's a lot of people who need housing. And 60 to 70% of that age group rents apartments. So these are why, if you look at the kind of data points we're going through now, this is why our business is ahead of the pack and will stay ahead of the pack for many years to come. Why the apartment business is such a great business. In addition, you have immigration. 85% of immigrants rent. So you have at least 1 million immigrants a year coming to this country. What's changed? In the United States, for most of post-World War II, housing was defined by a married couple with children. At least 50% of all housing units were that. Married couples with children are projected to decline to 25% of housing units by 2025. So average household size is declining. So what that means is you're going to need even more households. Even given a fixed set of population, you'll need even more housing units in the future. And by 2020, singles and unrelated individuals living together will comprise 1 out of every 3 households. So that's a lot of apartments, at least the way we see it. There are environmental factors to apartments that make sense. And let me just talk about our strategy for a minute. Our company, we used to own 240,000 rental units in the US in 35 markets. We are now in 10 or 12 markets, and we have 130,000 units. The value of our company hasn't changed. So what that means is we're selling 3 units in Raleigh to buy 1 unit in Manhattan. So our strategy is really, what we're doing is following you. What we're hearing and we're seeing is people want urban housing. People who are 20 to 34 don't want to live in the suburbs. And I don't know if people in this room see that as their, you're going to finish this program. Are you going to live in the suburbs or are you going to live in an urban area? I mean, where are people going? So our sense is you want to be urban and you want to be multifamily. So our strategy has been to get out of the suburbs into urban areas. And I put up a couple of slides here to show the environmental factors. By having more urban development where people live near where they work and don't need cars, not only will you save pollution, you'll preserve green space, and you'll also look at this statistic about sprawl, that nationally the US can save over $100 billion in infrastructure costs by growing compactly. So that's saying if we don't have to support highways out to the suburbs and all of that transportation network, we will save a fortune. And so part of the argument here is, you know, part of this money that went to build a highway can help build infrastructure in cities that make cities better places to live. So our strategy, again, get out of the suburbs, get into the cities. These are just examples. I wanted to show you kinds of properties that we own. So when I talk urban living, these are assets we own in Florida and Washington and California. What this graph shows is the true decline in home ownership over the last 5 years. If you look back to the early 80s, the home ownership rate in this country was about 65%. During the housing boom, over the, you know, between 2001 and call it 2005, that number increased to 69%. So you had all these people buying houses that basically many couldn't afford. And that is trending back down, as you see. Today, it's about 66%, and Moody's expects that to go to about 64% by 2012. So you, again, you have a shift out of single-family homes into rental housing. Just in the last year, 1.2 more million rental households were created in this country at the expense of single-family. This is a really interesting statistic, housing affordability, because this takes that same rental percentage and says, okay, today housing is the most affordable it's ever been. Prices are as low as they could possibly be in most cities. I mean, maybe in another 6 months they'll totally bottom out. What this graph shows that in spite of incredibly low interest rates and incredibly low home prices, so you have the most affordability, you have declining home ownership rates. People do not want single-family houses today. The notion of the American dream, owning a home and, you know, living in the suburbs, has changed. Again, echo boomers are the key driver for demand in the prime rental group, which is the 20 to 34-year-olds. And nearly 4 million people are turning 18 each year for like the next 15 years. So when you look at this demographic, you can see how fabulous the apartment business should be, you know, for not just the immediate future. This graph shows home purchase. The average age of someone buying a house in the U.S. is 30 years old. And what you see here is a decline in the home ownership rate, which is the red and yellow line, and people turning 30. So in general, even though people are reaching 30 years old, fewer of them are buying homes. I'm going to skip this one and this one. I just want to, again, show you a couple more of properties that we own, the types of things we buy today, types of things in the cities we're in that people are looking for. Now, why is our strategy more urban versus suburban? This is why. If you look at the national vacancy rate for apartments, which is the yellow line, the yellow bars, compare it to what we call our core markets, which are Boston, New York, Washington, D.C., South Florida, San Diego, L.A., San Francisco, and Seattle, which are the blue bars. You see that what we call our core markets are actually better occupied than the nation. This is the breakout by individual market, again, year over year. So it's showing you that as strong as these markets are in 2010, which is the blue line, they're getting even stronger in 2011, which is the yellow graph. So continuing to improve, strengthening of our business. Rental rates, it's the same thing. Again, yellow is 2011, and that's the percent growth in market rent rates in each of these markets. So a few of us were just talking about how markets are doing, but look at Boston. We are projecting 7% rent growth in Boston this year. In San Jose, just south of San Francisco, pushing 10%. You know, in South Florida, 5%. And I can tell you that in general, these are projections, and for the most part, they're being beat already today. Again, another example of the type of asset that we own in New York City. The point of this is just to show you what apartment absorption has done, but in general, well, I guess one thing I'd like to say about absorption, very little new product is being built today. It can't get financed. No one will finance it. So what you've had is a few years of virtually no new apartment construction. This country needs between 300,000 and 400,000 new multifamily units a year. Last year, about 70,000 market rate units were delivered, and about 50,000 low-income subsidized type units were delivered. So about a third of what's needed was delivered last year. But the other thing that you have to keep in mind about the apartment business, every year, about 150 to 250,000 apartment units leave the market, either through fire or redevelopment. So what's been happening, we've had several years of very low deliveries, but at the same time, we've lost product, just to the normal cycle of obsolescence. And there actually is a severe apartment shortage coming, which is, I think, what this says. Very little new supply. The industry is well positioned to reap benefits of an economic recovery. This just shows multifamily starts over time, how they've tapered down a lot in the last couple of years, which is the point I was just making. This graph shows household formations. And this is why the apartment business has been strong, because even through the recession, households have been added, and those people have been renting our apartments. And if you look at the estimate for this year and next, household formations will increase even greater. And 2012 will be a big year, because you'll have a return of job growth, which means that more households will be created because people who have been living with their parents will move out. They'll get a job, they'll move out. Roommates who've been living together will get their own places. And those are types of events that create more households. Again, new construction, all-time lows. And another example of the type of asset that we own. The reason I wanted you to see some of our properties is to think differently about rental housing. When I was in college, rental housing was, not a nice place. If you rented, you were a second-class citizen. You lived in a dump, and you couldn't wait to own something. Today, rental housing is nice. Like, this is one of our properties in Southern California. It's a really cool place to live. And today, people who rent do so because it gives them the lifestyle that they want without being tied down to the old American dream. So if you rent today and your job changes, you can go to another city very easily for that job. A lot of people who bought houses the last few years and who have changed jobs are stuck with a house that they owe more on than it's worth, and they have trouble making the decision to walk away. So I did want you to see the kinds of things that we, the kinds of housing we provide. And let me think what else I wanted to tell you about our business. I want to make sure that you understand the household formations drive demand, because it's not just jobs. A lot of what you hear in our business is that you need jobs to drive housing demand, but you don't. I mean, it helps, and ultimately you want job growth, but you will have housing demand just because of the natural growth of population. The other piece is the swelling of echo boomers over the next many years, which are adding a lot of people prime renter age for the coming time. The third piece is the fact that there's been very little new housing built, so the market is very undersupplied. And because housing can't be manufactured quickly, it will be undersupplied for a number of years. Even today, when things are improving, very little housing is starting. People still can't get the construction financing they need to build. So we're not there yet. We're not at the recovery point where the market's back. So those are the four factors that will allow this multifamily business to be a great business for the next many, many years. Anyway, I'd like to see what questions people have. And yep. Yeah. Got to have a job. Yes, job growth is important. I'm not saying that it isn't, but the old notion, there was a notion, even 2 years ago, there was a notion, read the Wall Street Journal from 2008, saying how the housing industry will collapse because there's no job growth. All that happened since 2008 in our business is we got better. We lost a lot of people to home purchases in 05 and 06 and 07. But in 08 and 09 and 2010 and 2011, we've had some of the best years ever because, because of household formation alone, because job growth went the other way. But yes, ultimately, job growth is a driver, not the only driver.
Do you have a lot of people that have foreclosed on coming to these properties to rent from you? And do you have a problem qualifying them?
Well, if somebody lost their house to a because of a foreclosure, and they have a job, I mean, we will, in most cases, we'll excuse an event like that if they can pay their rent and if they qualify. And we may require an additional deposit or something, but in general, we'll take people.
These look like apartments, so you probably don't have to worry about that much.
I would say, yeah, our segment these days is luxury housing, but the other piece of it is people rent houses too. They don't just rent apartments. So the interesting thing, though, is in the same markets where housing is very well occupied. Like in our portfolio, we're 95+% occupied for our apartments. In the same cities, houses that are rented are not as well occupied. They're probably 5 to 10 or more % less well occupied. So I guess one other point I'd just like to make, not everyone who rents a house, it's not the same person as who rents an apartment. It usually costs more to rent a house than an apartment because you're generally maintaining the house yourself, the lawn and things like that. So they're different renter groups. So you'll hear statistics today about the overhang of single-family housing in a market. And that might scare you about being an investor in the apartment side of the business. But they're really two different pieces of business that don't have a lot to do with each other. Yeah.
Do you see a lot of condos being converted back to apartments and timeshares to apartments?
Condos converted back to apartments. Yeah, well, there was a ton of it. The reversions. Well, there was, in 05, we sold a lot of our properties to people who converted them. And then the other stupid thing they did, aside from buying them at the top of the market, was they emptied them out, because they were going to sell them. So they moved everybody out, and all those people came and moved into our places. So in 05, we were like 99% occupied, and we had just sold things we wanted to get rid of anyway at the top of the market. So, but then what happened? Then none of that stuff got sold. It's all messed up, because they sold 20 units out of 200, and now it's fractured property, and then those people are in foreclosure, and the places are empty. So now they reverted back to apartments. But again, so we call those apartment reversions, and those don't compete with us much either, because generally they're not professionally run. Nobody wants to live in a community where half the place is empty or where half the units are in foreclosure. And so it's just interesting. It's interesting the dynamics that you think impact our business that don't. Like this overhang of condos or an overhang of single-family homes. To some extent it impacts us, but not really, not enough to do anything more than a point or two of occupancy out of our world.
You obviously see that multifamily has a pretty bright future from your presentation. What are some of the big obstacles you see coming your way?
Well, obstacles to multifamily, there are a lot. One of the reasons that multifamily has been successful through this downturn is because of Fannie and Freddie. Because Fannie and Freddie, aside from providing all these single-family home loans, provided the multifamily business with financing, and they still do. So even when the banks and insurance companies weren't lending, you could get a loan from Fannie on an apartment in 2009 when no one else would loan you a dime. And the other thing about Fannie and Freddie is their rates are cheaper than the life companies and the commercial banks. So they have subsidized the multi-housing business. The good news about Fannie and Freddie with respect to multi-housing is that the default rate is incredibly low. There's very little, of all of Fannie and Freddie's trouble, it's all on the single-family side. The multifamily side has been incredibly profitable with incredibly low default rates. The risk to the business is that Fannie and Freddie are going to go away. You know, they're entities that don't make sense anymore. And the question, you know, for the multifamily industry is when Fannie and Freddie go away, what happens to interest rates? Because will they be artificially low like they have been? And if they're not, if rates move up, then that means values move down, right? So all this real estate that you think is worth $10 billion is now worth $9 billion, or whatever the numbers are. And the other frightening piece of it is that Fannie and Freddie have been around to provide financing, and if they're not and no one else is, then housing that's needed won't get built. So really, Fannie, some form of government intervention into the financing of housing, I think makes sense because it does allow for housing that is needed to get built. You know, and again, if we spend less money on building roads and put that money back into, you know, affordable housing for people, why isn't that a good trade? Yep.
Financing sources. So I guess when you going forward, where do you see if there isn't any government like help? I mean, do you go back to life insurance companies?
Yeah. Well, financing's coming back, and in fact, you know, a company like ours, we have a lot of business with Fannie and Freddie. Our company is Fannie's largest borrower, and we borrow at any one time. We'll borrow $500 or $600 million at a time, and we'll put in a pool of assets that are collateral, maybe 50% loan to value, and we have substitution rights. So if we want to sell something, we can yank it out of the pool and substitute a different asset for it. So, so Fannie and Freddie, you know, have been a big player, but the life companies want to get back in, and commercial banks want to get back in. People are sensing that the economic conditions are changing, and they want to start lending again. So we are getting quotes today that are very aggressive. People want our business. They love people like us. They want our business. 50% loan to value with great assets. Who doesn't want that kind of business? So we're getting quotes today that match Fannie and Freddie's rates from other providers. And so for companies that are well capitalized, there's going to be other avenues. For people who absolutely, you know, can't do a deal without a particular interest rate that Fannie has to offer today and a particular deal structure, that is going to hurt. I think it's going to hurt the business. You know, so institutional buyers won't be affected. People like us, life companies, but the private person who has a partnership or an equity partner and they buy a few deals a year that are in the, I don't know, $5 to $20 million range, they will be affected, and it will reprice that class of real estate.
What is the status on the portfolio rationalization? Are you still selling non-core, buying in your core markets, or what percentage is in the core market, and what is the status?
Okay, yeah, so our company, we started on this. You know, it's funny because I like our strategy and I get it, and what the slides show you is that you have better occupancies and higher rents and better rent growth in these core markets. So it all makes sense. It's like, of course, you should be there. But our other strategy was we were highly opportunistic. If we saw a great buy in St. Louis, we went and bought it. You know, it's a great buy. We saw a great buy in Raleigh, we bought it. And so we were all over the place with what I would call opportunistic buys. And when you look at our IRRs on the deals that we bought and sold, we did quite well. And we're making a big bet because we're saying that in the long run, it's better to own this, you know, high value, high urban, you know, high barrier to entry stuff. But we are creating a lot of dilution to get there. So, and so what that means is dilution, you know, right now we're selling a property in Raleigh for, call it a 6 cap rate, a nice deal in Raleigh, North Carolina. We're buying Manhattan at a 4.5 cap, okay? So we were earning, now let me mention this, because the deal we're selling in Raleigh for a 6, we might be earning a 7. We're selling it on a 6 with market underwriting, but we're giving up a 7, and we're going and buying Manhattan at a 4.5. That's a lot of dilution. I mean, we were earning 7. Now we're taking those same dollars and we're putting it into something that's going to earn 4.5. Now we're saying that in the long run, you're better off in Manhattan. But until we get there, it's a big risk and a lot of dilution. I do think in the long run it's the right strategy. But when I look back at all the money we've made in Dallas and Austin and Houston and Raleigh and Charlotte and all these other places, I think you know, you can be successful in a lot of places. The difference is those markets require market timing very much. You know, that's the only way you're going to make money in Dallas. Whereas New York, I think if you're patient and you just sit still, you'll make money in New York. You know, it's a better bet. But and to answer your question, we're probably 80 or 85% through our portfolio restructuring. I would say we have 2 more years, and it's been about a 10-year process. Oh, okay. What?
I just want to know what your horizon is.
Yeah. I mean, you know, our horizon too, it's getting tougher to do business today because with nothing new being built, what are we going to buy? You know? And with rents moving up as quickly as they are today because the business is so good, nobody wants to sell today. Like, why would you sell today if you thought your rent tomorrow was 10% higher? The only reason you'd sell today is if you need to sell or if you're getting paid for tomorrow's income today. So there's just very little to transact today. And it's funny because while the market's improving, it's getting tougher and tougher to reposition our portfolio.
With respect to acquisitions, you mentioned that you had a few unique things that you look for, like a Whole Foods or Starbucks. What other aspects do you look at that are
For acquisitions, I only like to acquire properties in places I like to go and that are near restaurants I like to eat in. I don't know. What are the things we look for when we buy things? Well, we look for our demographic. So we're looking for, we like single people. We like single people who have good incomes. You know, actually, if you know, the way we track our portfolio, we have better rent growth in our 1-bedrooms than we do in our 3-bedrooms. So we like single people who have great jobs in urban areas. I mean, that's something we look for. And we actually have a very specific demographic that we go after. But in terms of geography, is that really your question, Drew? The locational aspects of things we look for? Again, it's high barrier to entry, so where it would be hard to build something new. And we also look for places where it's expensive to buy a house. So, I mean, Manhattan's a great example. You know, you can't afford a home in Manhattan. I mean, even a condo in Manhattan is very expensive. So, owning in Manhattan, I mean, it's clear that renting is an affordable choice to owning. And even places like Southern California, the average home price is, you know, $400,000. So renting, again, makes sense. And because home prices are so expensive, and because today, even with great interest rates today, down payments are 20%, it's hard to get into a house. So, we feel like people, not only will they pay us a lot of rent, they're going to stay put. They're not going anywhere. So we can ask them for more rent because they're staying, because they don't have anywhere to go.
Well, once you saturate your core markets and you bought everything that you can buy, what are you going to do next?
Once we control the world. Well, I think we have a lot of work to do even in our core markets, because in real estate you're always repositioning, and we're developing too. So, and today's a great time to build. Construction costs are low. They're really low. And so land is cheap right now. Construction costs are cheap. Rents are moving up. Like, I don't know why it isn't a great time for us to be building right now. So we will build, and to the extent that we can build and continue to reposition and get better and better assets, even within places like Manhattan, we'll sell the stuff that isn't as good, So I think there are very few assets that we would never, ever, ever sell, but there are a couple. But in general, I think you're always playing Monopoly in the business. And we're thinking too, from the development standpoint, we're developing in all those same markets that I mentioned, the coastal big cities. And today, we're buying land today for half of what it traded for 3 years ago, or would have traded for 3 years ago. And construction costs today are about 25% below where they were 3 years ago. And rents have recovered. Our rents have recovered to where they were 3 years ago. So when you put all that together, for us, it's a very compelling time to build. But one of the funny things we were talking about at lunch was the chairman of our company is Sam Zell. And one of Sam's expressions is, I never want to be the first owner of any piece of real estate. And what he means by that is, as the first owner, you have all the headaches, you have all the costs, you have all the risk, and if it doesn't go well, you lose the asset, right? Which is what's happened in this cycle. People built for way too much money. The deals didn't work. The banks took them back. And now people like us are coming in and buying those deals at half of what they cost to build. So we don't like being the first owner of real estate. But with where development prices are today, we think it's the right time to be the first owner of some of those things. Yeah.
Have your risk assessments in California taken into account disastrous earthquakes?
Right, risk assessments for earthquakes, hurricanes, terrorism. Yeah, I mean, we do factor all of that into things that we do, and certainly our insurance rates reflect those things. There's a premium on insurance in California. There's a premium on all of our buildings in Manhattan because of terrorism. And here in Florida, hurricanes. It's funny because the one place we got out of, the Midwest, has none of those issues. They don't have earthquakes, they don't have hurricanes, they don't have terrorism, and they have water, because water is a big issue, and they have it, but we're not there anymore. The reason we get out of the Midwest is we saw all the manufacturing jobs leaving. I mean, we saw the jobs leaving the Midwest. So we exited places like Minneapolis and Detroit, and even though we're headquartered in Chicago, we don't own anything in Chicago. We just don't think the Midwest is the bet for us. Cities with declining population, household growth going the other way. So, yes?
Are prices today in general below or above construction costs?
You mean to buy an asset today? Like if you were buying something that already exists today, is that below cost or at cost? That's a great question, because here's what happened. In 2009 and 2010, you could buy things at a discount to cost, a big discount. They were brand new assets that people built, they got into trouble, and they cut deals with their lenders, like short sales, and you could buy something for 70 or 80 cents on the dollar. And there was a window in there that about a year ago went away. And so when you were buying things like that, you were buying something at a big discount, but you weren't paying for it. Today, there are no deals. You are paying cost or more. You're paying for the upside today.
When you say cost, you mean the cost back then or the cost now? Because you said that the cost.
Well, today, cost today. Yeah, because costs, but my point about paying for upside, today you're paying for upside. Today, if you buy something on a 4.5 cap, you're paying that cap rate because you expect rents to move up. So if you buy something on a 4.5 cap today, you're really saying that's a 7% return in year 3. 2 years ago, you would have paid a 7% cap rate for the same asset. Today it's 5, 4.5, 5. So today you're paying for the upside, and in 2009 you didn't.
Does anybody you know believe you would be paying 4 caps again?
No, yeah, that's something too. But we don't just, in our world, we don't just pay 4 caps. I mean, we look at every metric possible. So we look at replacement cost. We look at trades. We really say to ourselves, from every angle, does this make sense? And the reason that's good is, because if you're the first one who pays a 4.5 cap, well, let me put it this way. We were probably the first ones to be back in the market. We were. We were also the first of our peers. The way we judge ourselves is by how we compare to our peers. There are a lot of other public apartment companies, and we look at their results every quarter, rental income, total income, expenses, and net operating income, and how do we compare to our peers. That's how we measure our performance. So we say, Camden has assets in South Florida. How did they do compared to our assets in South Florida? And I will tell you, because our sense about things even a year ago was that things have improved, we were very aggressive with our pricing of our rental units, just our rents, before everybody else in the market. So we beat all of our competitors last year across the board as a company, period. And everybody looked back and said, at the time, people were saying that you're crazy. But looking back, they said you were right. And I think some of that same kind of risk-taking and sense about the timing of the market, when it comes to acquisitions, if you're the first one back in buying, you're going to get a better deal than the next one buying. Because you're going to buy on a 5 cap when the next deal's a 4.5 cap. And so that's what happened too. We were able really when no one else was buying in the tail end of 2009, we overpaid for some assets. We were the crazy high bidder on several assets in Washington, D.C. These were condo buildings that were failed condos but not fractured, 100% rentals, granite countertops, high-rise buildings. And in the middle of 2009, we started putting offers in on these buildings and working with the banks. And these weren't in the hands of the banks. We're working with banks, with their developers, and cut deals to buy things. And at the time, again, we overpaid. But a year later, we look smart. Everyone's like, you're so smart, you bought in at the right time. Because those same assets, almost immediately, a year after we closed, they're worth 20% more. So I think, one other thing that's really interesting about the investment business, the money is made on the trade, on the buy and the sell. Being a good manager, you need to manage your properties, operate them well, and get as much income as you can during your ownership period. But the real money is buying right and selling right. I mean, I know it sounds obvious. You know, you want to buy low and sell high, but that is the truth. And the more times you're right about that, the better investment manager you are. So the way we look at it is we're a market leader. We try to think, we try not to follow the market. We try to say to ourselves, independent of the market, what should we do? You know, what should rents be? Even if our competitors are charging $1,000, what are our units worth? Maybe we offer more services. Maybe we have a program that someone values, like we have this coast-to-coast program that allows you to move from one community in one city to another community in another city if you change jobs without having to break your lease. We let you do that. That has value to people. So maybe someone will pay more to live at our property because of that. So our sense about all of this is it's great to know what everyone else is doing, but it's better if, you know, to be the lead thinker, the first one to act, and a lot of that's just risk taking, you know, educated risk taking.
Just a question about the advantages and disadvantages of operating as a publicly traded REIT. And Sam Zell was famous, 15 years ago for predicting that the percentage of commercial real estate stock that was going to be owned by REITs would go from 5 or 6% to 20 or 25% because of economies of scale, That really hasn't happened. In fact, you're downsizing your portfolio as well. So what do you tell, for example, your investors about the advantages of running as a public REIT as opposed to private?
Mm-hmm. Well, the advantages of public versus private. Well, I will say we are a smaller number of units company than we were 10 years ago, but we're a bigger value. So we're actually more efficient. I mean, we're managing $25 billion with a lot less people. You know, we like that too, because every time you sell 8 units in Charlotte and buy 2 in Manhattan, I mean, think about the overhead you're saving. You need 2 property managers instead of 8. And the other thing is, every time you buy a high-rise and you don't, you know, 1 building, 1 roof, instead of 30 buildings, 30 roofs, I mean, you know, you might say high-rises are more expensive to operate, but in a lot of ways they're not. You know, in a lot of ways they're cheaper to operate, and the events aren't as frequent. But I do think there's value to our platform. We were talking earlier about how real estate traditionally has been a local business. Local developers built things locally. The whole emergence of the REITs in the early 90s, in our mind, you know, what we did is we said, we're a national company. We're going to take this business national. We're going to create economies of scale that have never been seen before. We're going to, every time someone buys any service at any of our properties, we're going to run it through a central place. You know, we've cut deals with we're one of Whirlpool's largest appliance providers or buyers. I mean, can you imagine the pricing we get at Whirlpool? I don't think anybody has better pricing on appliances than us. We are one of the largest purchasers of carpeting in the United States. We have our own carpet manufactured for us. Many things that we do and many ways that we've thought about it have created very significant economies of scale that you can only do when you commit to the volume that we have. We're also big enough where we self-insure. So when we buy property insurance, we're insuring ourselves the first $5 million of an event. And we can afford to do that. But most people can't. But because we can do that, we're really only buying catastrophic insurance, which is a completely different price point, much cheaper. So in markets like South Florida, which is big hurricane risk, where a typical apartment property insurance might run $800 a unit, our insurance is $250 a unit. So think about that. Think how much more I can pay for something because of my economies. And I don't have to pay more. I only have to pay the market price for something. So think how much more NOI I'm returning to our investor because of our economies. So I think the model works, whether it's public or private today. I hate the public market. I just think it's an awful lot of reporting, and I don't know why anyone would so public today. With this Sarbanes-Oxley, since the whole Enron thing, and Sarbanes-Oxley, we have all these rules and that we never had before. We were much more nimble. Now we have rules and audits and weekly checks and, and all kinds of things that some of which, the process in general is good, but it slows you down. And I don't think in our case has helped. I mean, that stuff protects the crook, you from the crook, but I don't think it, protects a company like us. I will say, there's still the advantage, though, in a public REIT like ours. If you want to own real estate, you can go to the New York Stock Exchange tonight and buy our stock, EQR, on the New York Stock Exchange. You can become an owner of apartment buildings tonight if you want, and you can buy as much of it as you want. You never have to fix a toilet. You're not going to get a call at 2 in the morning that there's some problem or some issue at your property. And if on Friday or Saturday you decide to sell your position in that real estate, you can do it on Saturday. You don't have to put it on the market, hire a broker, and wait it out and see if you're ever going to sell the asset. So the liquidity issue is huge. And I, who am in the business, love it. I love the fact that I can buy real estate by going to the stock market. I actually don't want to own anything myself and have to deal with the headaches of it. Do we look at our stock price after we do something, like some event? Yeah. Yeah. You mean, no, you mean, does how the market is valuing our stock affect the decisions we make? I mean, ultimately, yes, right? I mean, ultimately, if the market didn't like what we were doing, they wouldn't pay as much for our stock. But I think in general, we try to operate by making good business decisions, which is the only way you can operate. The problem with Wall Street is a quarter-to-quarter thinking entity. And these stock analysts, that's how far they think, is like the next quarter. Real estate, as you know, is this long-term thing. And like we're taking this position today where we're saying we're willing to take dilution, of 1 or 2% of our income to reposition our portfolio. And Wall Street gets it. They understand what we're doing, and they agree with what we're doing. But that itself was a hurdle, to get the street to see what we were doing and to be okay with it. And but I think, no matter what you're doing, you have to make the right decisions for your business and not let the market tell you what to do.
When you said there's investors and they see what you're doing, do you announce did y'all announce your strategy, I guess like 8 years ago or whenever, and are you worried about other competitors stealing those ideas?
Do we announce our strategy, and are we worried about our competitors stealing? Well, we do announce our strategy. We have a quarterly earnings call, and I would encourage any of you to listen to some of these calls. Maybe you have, but aside from reading a quarterly earnings release, it's great to listen to the conference call. You got the CEO, the CFO, you got all the leadership team of a company talking about their business. And also on the line are the analysts, stock analysts who track these companies, and analysts ask questions. And so what we do, we have a call every quarter, and we talk about our business. And go listen to our call next quarter. We probably have one coming up in April or May, or I don't know exactly when, but it's online. And check it out. It's interesting. But you'll hear about our strategy. The great thing about public companies, again, and owning real estate, there's a lot of transparency. So what that transparency, keeps everybody honest, and I think levels the playing field. So anyway, that's just a benefit of the public. It's another benefit of public markets. Anyway, really listen to the earnings calls of some companies that you like. And ours too. You should listen to ours because I've been here and you've heard me talk. And to actually listen to our earnings call now, would be interesting because you've already heard some of the talk. Yeah.
What's the biggest risk your company faces today?
The biggest risk today? I think the biggest risk for a lot of companies are debt maturities. A lot of debt was placed in the last few years that is maturing next year. So what you have, it's not a risk for us, but this is a risk for a lot of real estate, that assets that were purchased in '06, you may have a debt maturity now or next year, and where the debt amount may be greater than the asset value. I think that's a risk for the business, and that's an opportunity for us. I mean, that's a way we grow, because people who can't refinance their debt are going to be forced to sell their asset in order to retire the debt, and we're there waiting saying, sell us your deal, we'll take it off your hands so you can pay Bank of America.
Do you think like that, since real estate it might be overbuilt, and that might be an understatement, that might slip into maybe lower rents in the future, or?
Well, the question is real estate overbuilt? But what product type are you talking about? Because apartments aren't overbuilt. I mean, retail in Palm Beach County is overbuilt. There's too much of it. But rental apartments in Miami are not overbuilt. In fact, there's a shortage. The occupancy rate in Miami for rental apartments is over 98%. Right. Well, I believed it because 2 years ago we were 95. You know what I mean? Because we saw the trend. Because we're watching the trend. But I agree that in general you wouldn't have predicted that. Overdevelopment of condos in Miami? There was. It's really interesting. Over 20,000 units were built in Miami in high-rises. And it was a disaster. A lot of people lost a lot of money because the way people got construction, the way that the developers got loans to build these buildings is they had to pre-sell 60% of the units or 80% of the units. So they went and sold them, and they got 20% deposits from people. And then they went to the bank and got construction loans. But because everything was so heated up, the market was so good, people, not only did they build too much, they overbuilt it. The specs were too good. Everything was granite and marble and high-end appliances and fancy stuff, because why not? If people are paying you and they're putting 20% down, what's the risk? The risk is that the only reason people were buying these units was to flip them. They never intended to move into them, and so there never was an ultimate market at $500 a foot or whatever the price was for that product. But what happened is all this stuff is through the cycle. The banks have gotten involved, and the developers are gone. The equity partners are gone. The mezz piece is gone. The deals are in the hands of the bank. The bank is saying, I'm taking a loss, and that the asset is worth whatever it's worth, $200 a foot. Well, at $200 a foot, there's a market. There's demand at a price. And I'll tell you today, in Miami, of the 4,000 units that exist in downtown and Brickell in Miami that are not sold, if you price them at $200 a foot today, you would sell them out in 90 days, all of them. So there's demand at a price. What's happening is prices are moving up, and people are saying, I don't want to sell today. I think if I wait, I'll get $400 a foot for this unit next year. Why would I sell today? And that's what's happening. So is there an overbuilt condo market in Miami? The answer is no. I mean, really no. And in fact, there is a shortage. Because again, if you follow the demographics and you look at the household formations that are coming, you will need housing in 2012 and 2013 and 2014. And in order to supply it at that time, you have to be building it today. And it's not being built. right? I think, yeah, I think it's really interesting because it is a disaster. I mean, a lot of people lost a lot of money. But on this end of it, a lot of people are making a lot of money, because things are getting so much better, so much faster, that the position that if a bank sold you 100 units at $200 a foot a year ago because they thought that they needed to liquidate, and those units are worth $300 a foot today, you made a lot of money. And that's what's happening. The other piece of what's happening in Miami, 70% of the buyers of these units are paying cash, and they're foreign. So the political risk in other places affects that market a lot. People in Brazil or Venezuela or wherever who either fear political risk or devaluation of their currency for some reason, they like having a real asset in Miami. And so anyway, that's what the other interesting thing is. Even without end unit financing for a lot of these units, they're getting sold to cash buyers.
Other questions? I have one or two. I'm fascinated with this picture up here.
Yeah.
In Florida, this courtyard would be a swimming pool, right?
Right, yeah.
Instead of a giant chessboard.
Mm-hmm.
Is this the new competitive norm?
Well, this property, this is really a beautiful property. We built this, and it's in Pasadena, which is like this really cool suburb of LA. And even though it's suburban, Pasadena is its own market and has train service into LA. So you can walk from here to the train into LA. But this asset also has a swimming pool and a lot of other amenities. But that chess thing, this whole area with these oversized pots and the plants and the chess game, it's just really cool. And
do you know if that chessboard is actively used somehow?
it is. It is. But they bring the pieces in every night so they don't get stolen. But they said people play it all the time. Yeah, it's great stuff. But see, that's a deal that we built we just delivered it last year. So we paid up for this deal, built at the peak of the market. So again, do I want to be the first owner of that? Oh well, we are. But today I can build that, for a lot less and have a better return than what we're going to get on this one.
Here's my last question. Is the competitive standard changing? I get the sense that it might be toward more permanent apartment
Yeah, I think that's a good question. You mean the type of housing that's provided, the quality of it? Yes, I think the quality of rental housing is evolving and into more permanent housing where people will stay put. And so yeah, I believe it is. It's changing, and it's confusing because in the 80s, in the 60s and 70s, apartment units were huge. A two-bedroom apartment had 1,400 square feet, and it was huge. And then in the 80s, they got smaller. Just financially, you couldn't build that. So a two-bedroom became 950 square feet. Then, when everybody was building bigger for condo, the units got bigger again. 1,100, 1,200 feet for a two-bedroom. Today, they're getting smaller. But the question is, if apartments become more permanent housing, where people live in them forever, what is the exact right product that you really need? That's not temporary in a sense. So we're trying to figure that out because again, it's certainly you're long in this stuff when you build it.
Other questions? Barry, thank you.
Thank you.